Hello, everyone. Welcome to this RadCom session entitled Countering Online Racialized Election Misinformation. In this section, we'll take a look at election misinformation, which targets communities of color. We will explore effective strategies and tools to identify, counter, and mitigate the spread of harmful online mis and disinformation, from dissecting common tactics to leveraging digital literacy and community engagement. The session will empower you all to confront election mis and disinfo head on by fostering dialogue and sharing best practices. We aim to fortify our collective defenses against the pervasive spread of false narratives that disproportionately impact racialized individuals and our communities. So I'm Jacquelyn Mason. I'm Director of Programs at the Media Democracy Fund, which is a nonprofit funding intermediary. We operate as a catalyst for an open, secure, and equitable internet. I'm also the Director of Programs for the Disinfo Defense League, which is housed inside of the Media Democracy Fund. And presenting alongside with me is Jaime Longoria, Manager of Research and Training for the Disinfo Defense League. So a little about our project before we begin. DDL is a network composed of organizers, advocates, researchers, and other tech experts dedicated to identifying and countering disinformation campaigns that target communities of color and undermine democratic processes. The DDL aims to protect the integrity of information and promote digital justice by advocating for policies which address the spread of false information, providing resources and training to communities to help them recognize and combat disinformation, and collaborating with tech platforms to improve their responses to disinformation. Disinformation campaigns often exploit social, racial, and political divides to create discord, suppress voting, and erode trust in democratic institutions. These campaigns can be particularly damaging to communities of color, which may be targeted with specific narratives intended to mislead or disenfranchise voters. Our efforts are geared towards empowering these communities through education, advocacy, and direct action to safeguard against the effects of mis and disinformation. The League consists of a diverse array of members, including civil rights groups, tech policy organizations, academic researchers, and grassroots activists, all united by the goal of defending the truth and protecting democratic engagement among communities of color. The work includes monitoring social media platforms for disinformation, lobbying for regulatory changes to hold platforms accountable, and providing resources and support to help individuals discern truth from falsehood online. So here is a bit about what we do. Research, news, and information on malicious attacks, research findings, and more are regularly emailed to our DDL Action Listserv. More about that later. DDL research team really is the engine for nearly all of DDL's work. They produce long-form reports and top lines for the network, specifically as we approach the election. The League also offers training and capacity building programs on a range of topics related to disinformation, including higher level trainings on disinformation monitoring and rapid response, topic-specific workshops or community listening sessions on core DDL issues, misinformation inoculation trainings, and trainings on narrative in the context of disinformation. DDL provided rapid response research, monitoring support, tactical trainings, and strategic panels to more than 130 organizations in 2023. DDL also uses events, both in-person and virtual, as an effective means of developing strategy and strengthening connections across the field. Propaganda and its world-affirming and world-building power have always relied on the weaponization and exploitation of deeply entrenched societal narratives. Therefore, DDL works with narrative experts in the field to form strategies around narrative power, as narrative plays a crucial role in mitigating the weaponization of racialized disinformation against folks of color. So here's a little bit about how we do it. DDL and the research team craft reports, such as our most recent election report, which has a framework that characterizes tactics showcasing larger connections versus granular details, including elements like trust, fairness, integrity, fear, and projection. We can share that report after this session. We also host events and topics such as online vicarious trauma, election disinfo research, and advocating for congressional action. And we have a robust communication strategy through the DDL listserv. DDL also facilitates working groups focused on specific issue-based narratives. Working group members coalesce around the following intersections of disinformation with topics such as policy, Asian American disinformation, our Narrative Council, grassroots mobilization, and immigration. Okay, so we can get into information disorder. So the term information disorder refers to the various ways in which misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation spread and impact societies. Misinformation refers to false information that is spread without harmful intent, while disinformation refers to the false information spread deliberately to deceive and or manipulate. I'll give some examples soon. And malinformation refers to true information that is shared with the intent to cause harm, such as by revealing private or sensitive information. Together, these forms of information disorder can have a significant social, political, and cultural consequences, undermining trust in these institutions, fostering polarization, and even inciting violence. Okay, so here we have an example of misinformation. Misinformation is information whose inaccuracy is unintentional and spread unknowingly. So you'll see these images leading up to the 2020 election. There were various instances where misinformation circulated regarding the United States Postal Service and its handling of mail-in ballots. One really prominent example involved claims that the USPS mailboxes were being locked and or removed as part of an effort to disrupt the mail-in voting process. So some individuals had or groups claim that, mailboxing were being removed in certain neighborhoods or communities to hinder access to mail-in voting. So images such as this and the next one were, pervasive on social media, fueling a lot of concerns about voter suppression and election interference. In reality, the removed or relocated USPS mailboxes wasn't uncommon, was part of routine maintenance. Sometimes mailboxes may be removed or locked for security reasons, but this was highly politicized in the context of a charged election season. So, this misinformation was amplified by partisan actors and media outlets, leading to widespread public concern and confusion. Some politicians and commenters seized these claims to criticize the USPS and raise doubts about the integrity of the mail-in voting process. So ultimately, this misinformation surrounding mailbox removals highlighted broader concerns about the integrity of the election process and the role of disinformation in shaping public perceptions, but was merely shared by folks who had a void of data around the process. Okay, so I think many of you may remember Dominion voting systems. During the 2020 US presidential election, Dominion voting systems was accused of various unsubstantiated claims related to election fraud and manipulation. These allegations were largely propagated by supporters of former President Donald Trump and some right-wing media outlets. Some of the accusations leveled against Dominion voting systems included claims that its software switched votes from Trump to Biden, that it was somehow connected to foreign entities or individuals, and that it had ties to the Democratic Party. These claims were widely debunked by election officials, cybersecurity experts, fact checkers, with no found evidence of widespread voter fraud or manipulation involving Dominion's voting systems. So despite this lack of evidence, the accusations fueled conspiracy theories and legal challenges seeking to overturn election results. Dominion voting systems was subsequently filed defamation lawsuits against individuals and media outlets such as OAN here that knowingly spread false claims about the company's role in the election. And so finally, we have malinformation. So Katie Hobbs, previously Arizona's Secretary of State, faced controversy when her twin sister, Kelly Johnson, accused the Democratic Party of funding extreme candidates endorsed by former President Donald Trump during a sting operation by Project Veritas Action. So her statements clearly raised a lot of concerns about potential conflicts of interest due to Hobbs' role overseeing elections in Arizona. So while this is true, it is important to note that these accusations were part of a broader political context and were subject to scrutiny and debate, but this information was revealed in a sting operation with intent to harm. Okay, so this brings us to racialized disinformation, and this is the work that we do solely within the DDL. So online racialized disinformation is false or intentionally misleading communication or propaganda, typically about racial or social justice issues. Racialized disinformation is strategically created and distributed through online media to deceive or manipulate the public for the purpose of achieving profit, political gain, and or sustaining white supremacy. So here's a few examples of some prominent tactics used in spreading racialized disinformation. So first we have inciting hate or promoting othering. I'm using this example of Vice President Kamala Harris, first Black woman and Asian American on a major presidential ticket in the US, leading up to the 2020 election under scrutiny for not being, an actually American citizen. We've heard this before. We heard this birtherism kind of narrative with Barack Obama. A similar narrative flowed from smaller groups into larger platforms about Kamala Harris. So the media falsely suggests that the senator at the time was her ancestry was inauthentic. So some individuals and or groups driven by their racial bias, driven by their prejudice, sought to undermine her legitimacy by constantly questioning her Blackness. I think there's another slide from a news show, but this was very pervasive, a tactic used to really influence and dissuade voter participation. This is Candace Owens, and she was mentioned frequently on Tucker Carlson and other media outlets. Next. Okay, so this is another tenet of racialized disinformation: harassing, slandering, and or criminalizing individuals, groups, or movements. So following the murder of George Floyd in May 2020 and the subsequent global protests against police brutality and systematic racism, various forms of disinformation emerged surrounding Black Lives Matter movement. So here are some common examples of this. I have a few screen grabs from the time. Disinformation really sought to downplay the severity of George Floyd's murder or shift blame away from the police officers involved. So this included spreading misinformation, misleading information, disinformation about Floyd's criminal history or health conditions, as well as baseless conspiracy theories suggesting that his murder was staged and or that he was a part of a larger plot. So this also helped with misinformation about protests to be pervasive online. False information circulated about the nature of protests, with some claims exaggerating the extent of violence and looting or falsely attributed to such actions to BLM activists. This misinformation aimed to delegitimize the protests and undermine their message against police brutality and racial justice. They also attempted to discredit the movement. Disinformation campaigns sought to discredit Black Lives Matter movement by spreading false narratives about its leadership, funding sources, and goals. Some conspiracy theories falsely claim that BLM was funded by wealthy individuals or organizations with nefarious intentions, while others attempted to portray the movement as violent or extremist. And there are still repercussions to this disinformation campaign till this day. So our last tenet is impersonating and infiltrating groups online to disrupt building solidarity. This is one of my favorite pieces of information on the tactic to impersonate Black women online and infiltrate Black spaces. Shafiqa Hudson sadly passed away a couple of weeks ago due to long COVID. She was a scholar with a deep commitment to Black feminist scholarship. Her public writings on feminism, critical race theory, and disinformation were essential, not only to building and advancing our field of work, but also expanding and inspiring our visions of justice, liberation, and what's possible. So Shafiqa was one of the creators behind the 2014 Your Slip is Showing hashtag. Your Slip is Showing really exposed coordinated racialized disinformation campaign by right-wing Twitter accounts impersonating Black women to spread anti-feminist propaganda and misinformation. So one day Shafiqa is online, she sees a very suspicious hashtag, End Father's Day. She sees the text of, because I'm tired of all these white women stealing our good Black men, something about the grammar, something about the failed use of AAVE, made her question, right? Like she knows that Black women would not want to abolish Father's Day because of interracial dating. And she said that it was too cartoonish to be real. So she found herself horrified by this information, but, did a deep dive and really shed light on impersonating Black people online, right? And this is pervasive in the Black Lives Matter movement. This is still pervasive now. It also shed light on how Black feminists are constantly targeted, face challenges like harassment and marginalization radicalization, and they, when they engage in activism and advocacy on social media platforms. And Shafika worked really hard to highlight the importance of amplifying the voices of Black feminists and resisting attempts to silence or erase their contributions to online discourse, as well as the need for allies to support and defend Black feminists against online harassment and attacks. This is important to highlight too, and I'm staying on the subject of impersonation online. So in 2018, a high-ranking Australian union official was suspended upon running a fake Black Lives Matter Facebook page that solicited donations from the movement supporters. An official with the National Union of Workers helped set up and run the Facebook page called Black Lives Matter, as well as other domain names linked to Black rights. The page, which was removed by Facebook after CNN queries, had almost 700,000 followers. It doesn't sound like a lot in 2024, but at the time it had almost double the official Black Lives Matter page. Another page called Blacktivist, also inauthentic activity, a social media account coordinating and promoting the marches online were not run by Black American activists, but instead it's now believed were operated by an agent of Russia attempting to interfere with US politics. 60,000 people followed Blacktivists on Facebook, and sizable crowd actually physically showed up to events that they promoted, right? And these are inauthentic events that people are showing up to. So I'll leave this here. Between the years of 2015 and 2017, the Internet Research Agency, Russia's source of United States election interference, reached more than 120 million people on Facebook and at least 20 million people on Instagram. They also produced 1.4 million election-related tweets and uploaded more than 1,000 videos to YouTube. And we have here, and I think we've heard this quote a lot, if you haven't, part of the Mueller report, no single group of Americans was targeted by IRA information operatives more than African Americans. By far, race and related issues were the preferred target of the information warfare campaign designed to divide the country in 2016. So racialized disinformation poses a particularly serious risk during election seasons, as it has increasingly been used to misinform voters, depress turnout, and otherwise undermine the democratic process. So by impersonating Black activists and creating fake personas, bad actors eroded trust within online communities, sowing doubt about authenticity of genuine BLM voices and initiatives. This manipulation diminished the credibility of the movement and undermined the ability to effectively advocate for social justice and racial equality. So through these impersonation tactics, actors sought to shape public discourse and influence perceptions of movements by amplifying polarizing messages and promoting extremist viewpoints. They distorted public understanding of the movement's goals and objectives. The impersonation of activists by bad actors undermined the integrity of online spaces, exacerbated divisions within movements, distorted public discourse surrounding issues of racial and social justice, and impact democracy. These tactics represent broader a pattern of foreign interference aimed at destabilizing democratic societies and undermining movements for social change. So this would be a case study in racialized disinformation and its effects on democracy. Okay, so we'll move into narrative, power, and strategy. And I'll just read off some definitions on what we mean when we talk about narrative power, and then we can get into an actual example and talk through that. So message, the words, slogans, and images that serve as reminders of what we think and how we might choose to act. We also have story, a discrete description of an event or sequence of events that includes characters, conflict, and imagery. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Stories are the building blocks of the human knowledge and primary way our brains make meaning. Narrative, a collection of stories and beliefs, repeated and strengthened over time through stories and messages, that is articulate why things are the way they are and what's possible and what's not. Narratives tell us how we should feel, think, and act. They define who we trust, love, fear, and blame. and deep narrative. The frameworks and values that undergird entire narrative systems. Deep narratives constitute worldviews, the way in which people understand their world. They impact how we view power, who can exercise it, how and for what purpose. Deep narratives comprise what we view as common sense or natural. And then finally, what we mean when we talk about strategy. So narrative strategy, the praxis, the combination of theory and practice of thinking through and using stories, messages, narratives in a purposeful way to move people toward narratives, deep narratives, and worldviews we want to advance. We also have cultural strategy, the practice of leveraging catalytic and emotional power of culture and the arts to shift attitudes, behaviors, resources, narratives, and power.
Thanks, Jacquelyn. I can jump in now and introduce this next video a little bit. So it was December 4th when rumors broke out about a situation that was happening at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. Apparently, there were some suitcases that were introduced into the rooms quite early in the day that were being pulled out of one of the tables that was set up by someone who was working the election. And in these suitcases, allegedly, there were ballots that weren't supposed to be included with the rest of the ballots that were being counted that night. So we'll tee up this video, and then we will revisit those definitions that Jacquelyn shared with us earlier, and we'll sort of use this video and this claim to frame our understanding of this event and how people actually utilize the same strategies and narrative building strategies that we just talked about to their own advantage.
At about 8 o'clock in the morning, we're going to roll this back and show it to you. There you go. So now they're going to start pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there. So the same person who's staying behind now, the same person who cleared the place out under the pretense that we're going to stop counting, is the person who put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table. Yeah, upper right hand, you see the gentleman in the red. So he just pulled one out. So what are these ballots doing there, separate from all the other ballots? And why are they only counting them whenever the place is cleared out with no witnesses? Is the question. So these machines can process about 3,000 ballots an hour. You have multiple machines there, and they're there for 2 hours. So you do the math. How many ballots went through those machines in those 2 hours when there was no one there to supervise, to be present, consistent with your statutes and rules, to supervise the tabulation? We believe that could easily be, and probably is certainly, beyond the margin of victory in this race.
Okay. So I actually misspoke earlier. If you see the date on the video, it's 11/3. So that was on election night, actually. But it was in December 3rd when President Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani amplified this video and also brought it to OAN. As of now, I think these 2 workers that were being accused of fraud sued OAN and OAN settled with outside of court. And I believe the case against Giuliani might still be pending for defamation. But let's
at about 8 o'clock
at sort of the structure that Jacquelyn presented to us earlier to kind of understand what's going on. So messaging, remember, these are slogans, images, things that really get people to the core of understanding, right? These are things that at this point, these audiences had already been primed with for weeks, even months, right? We had a lot of hashtag Stop the Steal going on. The day after that started coming up and propping up really widely the day of the election. I believe the first Stop the Steal tweet that was identified by our team when we were monitoring the election was at 8 in the morning in Philadelphia when someone was denied entry into a polling place. And nights after the election, crowds were also protesting at buildings at these like facilities where votes were being counted. Some of them were protesting to stop the count. Others were protesting to count the vote. There was also a lot of rumors about ballot drops. These are usually categorized by people claiming that in the middle of the night, trucks come by and drop sacks of ballots that get counted and inflate Democrat votes artificially. And this was an example of one of those alleged ballot drops that were rumored to happen quite frequently. So the messaging was there, right? There was a lot of sloganeering, there were hashtags, there were protests. So by the time folks saw a video like this, they were sort of already primed to believe and primed to sort of go in a specific direction when they were exposed to this type of content. The story, though, is pretty clear, right? These election workers, who are Black women, are manipulating the results of the election. That's what the video shows us, and that's the story that was being amplified by Rudy Giuliani, OAN, Donald Trump on December 5th, also amplified this video. And I believe Giuliani said that this video was proof that, that the Democrats had stolen the election in Fulton County. No questions asked. So the narrative. This story feeds into a narrative that says that election results cannot be trusted, especially when people of color are involved. And we see part of this narrative now being built out today with a lot of anti-DEI stuff, right? So it's that particular focus on the fact that I think especially the person who pulls out the suitcase first, is a black woman. So that sort of adds that element, that racial element that we always focus on. So as a whole, the narrative is the election results cannot be trusted, especially when people of color are involved because of systemic fraud. And this is just one example, allegedly, of a system that is wrought with probably a lot of the same examples is what they would have you believe, right? Even though they're only showing you one story, this narrative that story is building on asks people to believe that this is widespread, right? Imagine all the other things that go on that you cannot see, that you do not know about, because this is the only one this is the only story that we've been able to find for you. What undergirds that narrative and that belief system is the deep narrative, right? This is what basically the worldview that is informing that the narrative informs, and sorry, that informs the narrative, right? And that is that our political opponents and their allies, and you could read here, racialized people, marginalized people should be disenfranchised by any means necessary, right? That they should not have access to their votes should not be counted equally or should not be counted at all compared to us, because we don't cheat. So when we talk about how we go from message to story to narrative, from deep narrative, the way that they do this is by flooding the zone, right? That's the narrative strategy. This is a thing that Steve Bannon always mentions. It says flooding the zone with shit. But I don't like to use the whole phrase all the time, but that's it, right? They're flooding the zone with stories. And that's basically what we get when we're doing a lot of monitoring on election day or around elections. We're looking for stories that can give us an indication as to what the narrative is building out, right? A lot of the examples that Jacquelyn presented at the beginning, for example, were stories. Someone walks up to a mailbox that's blocked. The story is that that mailbox was closed. The narrative is that the USPS system is being turned against people so that they can't vote. And the deeper narrative is that the whole system is corrupt and there's systemic fraud, right? So that's just one story out of, I think, thousands that you'll see when you're tracking mis and disinformation around events, specifically as we're doing now in elections. The other thing they do is they muddy the waters, right? they ask questions that have no clear answers, or that don't have immediate clear answers, to sow doubt. We'll get into that a little bit later. And how do they do this? Basically, the cultural strategy is through racialized disinformation, right? Through the production of memes, through media manipulation, source hijacking, where they get reporters to believe some of this stuff and amplify it. They have influential people who are there to distribute the stories, right? That's the cultural strategy, that a lot of these things become so ubiquitous that people take them to be true. And that's why we at DDL focus a lot on racialized mis and disinformation. Actually, it's our main focus, especially when we look at elections. And although folks might ask us, like, how is that related? We believe that these cases show that racial resentment is at the center of a lot of the conspiracy theory belief. And because these examples of election mis and disinformation are taken as a fact, and create a widespread feeling that elections are not safe and secure, they're used to pass regressive legislative actions that make voting less accessible to everyone. But for starters, I mean, we know what communities are going to be the most affected, right? It's going to be primarily communities of color, primarily Black communities. So for us, that's why we believe that election mis and disinformation is inherently racialized, because it is used to target and disenfranchise people of color. So I think at this point we can talk a little bit more about being skeptical when you're doing research, and also avoiding amplification, which is something that we're always worried about when we're doing this type of research and looking into specific incidents that we spot online. So we'll go through this case study fairly quickly. This case study is from September 29th, 2020. And it's I believe this was before the election. We were looking at a post from Yusvani Perez, who I believe is a Cuban influencer on Facebook. He was really popular during the 2020 election. Also combined a lot of like religious like content with political content. And he kind of rode the line between like really advocating for far-right politicians, and sort of just like asking questions that provoke people who probably were like kind of not sure which way they wanted to vote. His Facebook post, which was shared more than 1,000 times and garnered a lot of pretty good interactions for something in Spanish, says, according to this survey that Telemundo did, 66% of people think that Donald Trump won the debate. This was a debate that happened, I believe it was either the night of or the night prior. And obviously he's referring to Latinos. This post in particular is from Telemundo News. And as you can see at the bottom, it says hashtag decision 2020, who won the first presidential debate? And we have Biden sitting at 34% and Trump sitting at 66%. So it was a widespread image. And the poll suggested that a majority of Latinos obviously were siding with Trump after the debate. And as I mentioned, the results, although the post itself doesn't clearly state it, the results are attributed to Latinos because of the viewership of Telemundo. And the content was being amplified not just in Spanish-speaking spaces, but also in most of the like prominent far right and right-wing spaces on a number of platforms. And these posts were being reposted and getting shares in the thousands. You can see here, you probably recognize a couple of these names: Kayleigh McEnany, Sarah Palin, Rush Limbaugh, Latinos to Save America, Daily Wire. That was all on Facebook. Some of these were getting 4,000 shares, which is something that we look at a lot when we do our research. We want to understand the spread, right? So on this platform, it had pretty good numbers by a pretty diverse set of posters. On Telegram, we have the same. It's the same image. I think there's a couple of variations, right? You have some screen recordings, you have some direct uploads. But look at those likes. We have everything from, I think, like 15K to 1K. So pretty good interaction on Instagram. And our last panel shows us shares of the same image and the same 66% on Reddit. Not so much engagement everywhere, except, the gatewaypundit.com article that was shared into r/conservative did get over 1,000 upvotes, which is a pretty good number. But yeah, so overall, we can see that, this really builds out a case, right? If you see something like this, that's pretty convincing that, this poll that was run by a news agency, by the media, especially Spanish-speaking media, says that a lot of people think that Trump is actually ahead of Biden during the debate. The image was real. I went through Twitter and I found the actual place where they got the poll, right? Like, this poll was posted on Twitter, and actually it's a Twitter poll, which wasn't clear by the image that was being shared. And here it is. It says #decision2020, who won the primary debate. We have the results are a little different, right? Because I had found this, I think, maybe a couple of minutes after the vote was shown on television. So people had kept voting. So the poll results actually showed that users had voted for Trump, that Trump had won. It was pretty accurate to what we were seeing on TV. But my question was okay, so this is a Twitter poll that wasn't clearly conveyed through the image that was being shared online. What was being said was that this was just a poll. You'd think that it's a scientific one, especially coming from attributed to Telemundo. But this was the first doubt that we sort of had that, this isn't legitimate data. Anybody could go and vote. I think the person who invented these opt-in polls at Twitter has said many times that this is actually one of the most manipulated tools that Twitter has ever built. But they had to balance whether or not they wanted this feature, and they, in the end, included it. So it was being used for things like this. We dug a little deeper and actually found that on 4chan, there was actually a whole campaign to try to change the results of a lot of these Twitter polls to sort of shift perception about who was in the lead and who was lagging behind after that first debate. If you see on the left, the link at the very bottom actually links to the Telemundo poll that was aired on TV and then spread pretty widely, making the claim that Latinos prefer Donald Trump after the first election, after the first debate, excuse me. So that's just a quick lesson. Remember, not everything is about a coordinated or bot campaign, but you should always remain skeptical. Sometimes these things do happen, right? Sometimes there are efforts to coordinate to sort of make specific perceptions be widely accepted. And as you can see, the goal of these campaigns is really to trade up the chain, right? This campaign in particular started off at 4chan and ended up being played on national TV in Telemundo. But again, you don't want to be the one to contribute to the spread of mis and disinformation. So you have to make sure that what you're seeing is an actual concerted effort, and that you're not being fooled to amplify a poll that might not be real, or that might not have legitimate data behind it. So there are sort of a couple of questions that we always like people to ask themselves before they engage any of the content that they see online. The first thing that we have to focus on is identifying the point of no return, right? This is a point that while you're doing your research and working to understand the dynamics in your community, including a couple of other variables that we'll go over soon, this is a point that you sort of come up with on your own. It's bespoke, right? It's something that's personal to you and your community, and how your community sort of shares information. So I know that might that might sound a little strange, but we'll get to that reasoning in a second. And as I mentioned, the other thing that we look at for a good metric of spread is shares, right? We have so many we have so much data from social media, from the likes to the comments to the reactions, but I think what's most important for us to understand is the movement of information. So wherever we have the possibility to see how much something is being shared or retweeted, for example, that's sort of the data that we care about the most in terms of measuring what we think is something that we want to intervene on. So this is the trumpet of amplification. This image sourced from First Draft. It's pretty useful in understanding how some of these campaigns actually work. The Telemundo campaign is pretty closely followed by follows this pattern. It starts off in the anonymous web, places like 4chan. It could move into other closed networks. So these apps like Telegram, WhatsApp, Discord, where people in these closed channels can also continue coordinating who's voting on what poll. Are there other polls that people would consider? What sock puppet accounts are they using? From here, claims could go into conspiracy communities. So people started claiming that, the vote was legitimate. And then these come out in social media, where there's a lot of politicians, people who work in the media, journalists, influencers, who then pick up these images or numbers or just the claim in general and pass it off as real. And at some point, you get a lot of right-wing influencers sharing the same thing, or you get a lot of liberal influencers sharing the same thing. And then you'll see it maybe on nightly news, right? Or on a cable news the next day, where someone's addressing something that was made up, or that was started off on one of these anonymous forums that should never have been amplified to begin with. So again, you don't want to contribute to the spread of mis and disinformation. So when you intervene, it's really important that you consider the size of the community that you're looking at. When we're talking about specific topics, for example, if you had seen this survey on being shared in your community, you have to ask yourself the question, sort of, what size of community am I dealing with? Am I dealing with a specific congressional district? Am I looking at a small town? Are the folks that I work with statewide, or are they national? Also, am I just focused on a particular platform or particular spaces on platforms? Are you focusing, for example, on specific Facebook groups, right? And once you see content prop up in that Facebook group, automatically oh, since it's here, I can assume that folks in my community are sharing it. So now is the time to intervene. You don't want to intervene on stuff that hasn't passed this threshold, so that point of no return that we talked about a little bit earlier, because you could be the one who ends up giving this claim wings, basically, and spreading it to other people. You also have to ask yourself how far the content has spread. So as I mentioned, shares is a good example to see how that spread looks, and also looking for that content on different platforms or different spaces online, so that you can be sure that if you know where your community is and you see something there, you have enough backup, enough evidence, enough research behind you that can help you determine whether or not you want to intervene. And always remember, it's important to balance the cost benefit for intervention. there's this question about the public good, right? Whether or not you being in these spaces and finding information, mis and disinformation in these spaces, is it for the public? Will the wider public and your community benefit from you bringing that content out to light and exposing it for what it is, right? Because sometimes, as we mentioned before, again, you could be amplifying not just a piece of content, but a particular community that may not have been as popular before. So those are some considerations. This is how we sort of envision that tipping point. As I mentioned, you kind of have to decide where on this gauge you fall on, depending on those factors that we mentioned, the size of community you're working with and researching, and also like what other sort of spaces online you're looking at. But this tipping point is really important to put some thought into. So I would recommend that, you give yourself a threshold of shares, and you assign yourself some spaces online to look at. And once, you see something that's passing the tipping point, then you begin to consider whether or not you want to intervene. But this takes a little bit of time. And I think using other examples of information and seeing how that flows throughout a community could give you a good idea into what your tipping point should be. Yeah, so what factors do you need to consider when you have sufficient spread? So these are the questions that after we have this hunch that like, yeah, this is being amplified pretty broadly. This is sort of a checklist that you can use to like reassure yourself that it might be a time to intervene. It's the acronym is POINT: platforms, outlets, influencers, numbers, travel. So the first question is this piece of information moving from one platform to another? That example with the Telemundo poll, we found that it was moving through some of the most major platforms online, so that would be a check. Outlets are other journalists and publishers writing about it. There were a lot of right-wing journalists sharing it, so I would say that would be a check. Did an influencer share it? So many influencers, as we saw, were sharing that image in the 66%, so that would be a check. Number of engagement on each of those platforms that we saw, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, it was pulling really good numbers. It was in the thousands, and we were looking at the national level, and some of them were in the tens of thousands. So I would say for the national level, tens of thousands on Facebook, Instagram, and in the thousands on Reddit. I would say that would be a check for me. And then travel, is it moving from one community to another? As we saw, like we were able to pull examples in English and Spanish, so that was another check for me. That claim had traveled pretty broadly, and it was time for us to come out and publicly explain the poll, and also expose some of the coordination that had happened in the back end. This is a tool that, although it is owned by Facebook, Meta actually, and has been sort of sunset, still keeps working. It works with articles. So if you're on a URL that is a media outlet, or any URL that could be shared on a platform, just be copied and pasted. You can click the little Chrome extension that'll pop up on your browser once you install it, and it'll show you where on Facebook it'll show you where on Facebook the article is being shared. So that can give you a good idea of specific, if you have a local outlet, go on to those articles that are particularly of interest to communities that you think you want to keep an eye on, and see where they're sharing that information on Facebook. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for Twitter or Reddit anymore because of API limitations. And sometimes it'll work on Instagram, but as you probably know, folks are more likely to share screenshots of articles rather than links to articles on Instagram. But yeah, CrowdTangle, it's like a really pretty good Chrome extension, and as far as I know, it's still pretty functional. So we'll move pretty fast through these because I think I'm straggling a little behind. So for understanding counter messaging,
May I just, you're good. Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. For understanding counter messaging, there are like these 4 concepts that I want you to keep in the back of your mind when you're working on this. So the first thing is about factual corrections, right? We tend to believe that if we give people the facts and the data, that they'll change their minds, right? That they're rational creatures, just like us, apparently, and that they'll be reactive to a correction, right? But that doesn't always that's not always shown to be true. Factual corrections, um, even if they do lead to a change in belief, like don't always lead to a person changing their attitude or behavior, right? There's a lot of psychology that there's a lot of complex psychology behind like a lot of the conversations that we have that still needs a lot of investigating. And these are questions that we're constantly grappling with. Especially, I mean, even when we go as far as like tackling the questions that Jacquelyn did for us at the beginning about what is mis and disinformation. How do we know that someone is spreading something, spreading a claim because they know it to be false or they know it to be true, right? That's even like, that's another question, because some people like, there's a dynamic where people want power, so they share their whole worldview sort of shifts to accept these things to be true. But factual corrections, again, changing people's belief, but not their attitudes or behavior. I think a good example of that is um, like a good example of that. I'll use a personal anecdote. Like you know, if you I went to a restaurant and I got I got really sick after I ate there. Um, and you know that feeling that like when you see that restaurant again, like it just grosses you out and you don't want to go there because you associate that behavior like, yeah, I got sick from food from that place. But then you find out like a week later that actually it wasn't the food that you ate for lunch at that place that you associate with getting you sick. It was another restaurant that you ate at in the morning. But you're still like, because you had that initial gross out feeling with that second restaurant that like didn't cause you to get sick, that can continue, right? Just because you know that it was actually not that restaurant, it was the one before, it doesn't really change your attitude towards the second one, because that's the one that sort of prompted you to feel gross, right? It's a silly example, but I think it's pretty good at illustrating how a factual correction and you knowing the truth is not going to change the way you act, right? Like, I'm never going to eat at that place again, even though I know that that wasn't the one that got me sick. And there's also a thing called the continued influence effect, which is related to this. That's the continued reliance on inaccurate information in people's memory as reasoning after a credible correction has been presented, right? So that's what's at the core of this phenomenon. It's like you're still relying on your memory and your feelings, even though you have correct information in front of you. Number 2 is familiarity. So this is about exposure, right? Repeat exposure to information without correction fosters belief. This is called the illusory truth effect. So this is basically that like the repetition of misinformation, the repetition of inaccurate information can lead someone to believe that it is true. I don't know if you've ever seen these like little experiments where it's a crowd of 5 people and 4 people decide to convince one person that something is true, even though it's not. Like, just because of that repetition of 4 people around you, they're able to shift your vision of the truth and manipulate what you believe, even though you might like have no memory of this and know deep down inside that it's not true. The repetition and the social pressure really like makes you act, makes you behave differently, right? The good news is that you can also use the illusory truth effect to your advantage. The repetition of the truth is also something that can, correct that belief as well. Number 3 is don't worry about backfire effects. So backfire effects were a phenomenon that were thought to happen when people would try to debunk information, right? It's sort of what we were talking about with amplification, but that's a little different, because when we talk about amplification, that uses a lot of repetition. Like Amplification causes repetition. So that's like the illusory truth effect, right? What we're talking about now is on an interpersonal level, like sort of debunking something to someone interpersonally. It was believed that you would sort of incendiate like that person's belief, right? That they would want to deliberately be defiant, and that belief would grow stronger, right? That hasn't been proven to be true. So you don't need to worry too much about that. And then the last thing is that there are 3 approaches to slowing the effects of misinformation. These can take place before someone's encountered that information, after, or can be throughout, their just engagement in society and with media and being online. And these are the 3. It's pre-bunking, debunking, and narrative interventions. We'll go with pre-bunking first. So there are 2 ways to do this. Pre-bunking mis and disinformation, just like straight up, right? Like telling people, these are the things you're going to see, so beware. Specific warnings and claims and narratives that people should expect to see, has shown to slow the velocity of the spread of that content. We have one training where we literally go through all the stuff that we saw at the last election, telling people, these are the tactics, these are the posts, you're probably going to see something similar. The less specific warnings are also pretty useful, right? These less specific warnings focus pretty much on just the tactics and the strategies used to misinform people. This also, like, this video in particular comes from Jigsaw. Their research has shown that doing this, like focusing specifically on the tactics, has also opens people up for future interventions as well. There's series of videos like this one focuses on false dichotomies and basically warns people, if someone's giving you a choice between 2 things, that's likely not something that's likely not good information, right? Their world is not binary. That's a reductive way of thinking about social issues, blah, blah, blah. There's other videos about scapegoating, right? The example there is like, if someone's giving you information that is blaming one particular group or one person for a huge complex social issue, that's likely not good information. It's pretty good. These are pretty good examples of, I think, pre-bunking that doesn't get too deep and into the weeds. That's been proven to be effective because they've actually done like the research. Jigsaw is part of Google, so they ran these videos as ads on YouTube. So they have been tested, and I encourage folks to take a look at them if you have the time. This is the thing that you have to focus on, though, if you're going to do some pre-bunking. We call these data deficits. So these come about when there's something new and complicated, or a process of events happens that not many people are educated on, and isn't really well understood. This produces like gaps in information that make it difficult for even someone like you to find an answer, perhaps, right? Because you might not be an expert in that specific space. This graphic from First Draft is pretty good at guiding us through like the process of how these data deficits are created and how they can be taken advantage of by specific actors. So a new novel or previously niche issue surfaces. People have a lot of legitimate questions. There's not a lot of information out there. So malicious actors like swoop in and start filling that gap, that deficit, with their own misleading information. And then these messages are then laundered through information ecosystems, thanks to a variety of manipulation, dissemination tactics. And then the message is amplified and reinforce narratives that shift people's belief. And all this just happened because something came about that created a gap in information. So if you're going to pre-bunk, you have to find out where these data deficits are, right? Look for unanswered questions in the press or from officials. If you're doing searches online, after your keywords, put a question mark in quotations so that you bring up questions that people are asking. Identify platforms that your community goes to. And also Google Trends is a pretty good tool for being able to understand what's happening, even at the community level sometimes, if there's enough data. Let's see. Sorry, just checking my notes pretty quickly. So debunking requires an explanation about why a claim is not correct. But you also have to provide an explanation of the truth, right? You can't leave people with a sort of knowledge gap, because then that debunk is not going to be effective, right? In essence, you're sort of creating a data deficit for folks internally that they can then fill with their own information, or they can sort of just backtrack, right? So an effective debunk fills that causal gap that's left behind by an effective correction. So if you look at this from this article from PolitiFact, is about 100,000 Wisconsin voters who were registered, who were older than 100 years, I think. Yeah. Or allegedly dead, I guess you can say. I think the headlines were that, there were like hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin voters were dead. So you start off with 3 bullet points. The first one explains the issue, right? Wisconsin municipalities keep their own registration records, and the smallest municipalities weren't required to keep records at all until a 2002 federal law required a statewide database and standard format. So that's sort of explaining, it's a truth, right? It's explaining the process. And then it's explaining what happened. When a municipality system didn't track a voter's date of birth or initial date of registration, a default date entered into the statewide system 1/1/1900, January 1st, 1900 for the date of birth, and January 1st, 1918 for the date of registration. These were placeholders, right? So it's basically giving you like it's filling that causal gap that's left behind when we're told that, oh, this is just an administrative issue that happened. These people weren't actually like 100 years old. It also gave us a why. It explained to us why this happened and told us like, well, this administrative issue had to do with a default procedure where if we didn't have information, we just stuck those numbers in. So that's how you fill causal gaps. You need to really focus not only on doing the correction and giving people the facts, but also giving them a why. These are other tips for debunking mis and disinformation. Remember to always start with the facts. You got to fill those causal gaps. Keep your responses simple, right? That's the key. The lies and mis and disinformation and rumors and propaganda that you're going to be combating, it's pretty simple, right? That's why it's so alluring. These like pretty simple explanations of the world that people really get attached to because they are simple. So you have to try to make the truth also seem pretty simple, even though sometimes it's quite the opposite. You also have to approach people with respect and understanding, right? People believe what they believe because of like real social anxieties. So some empathy is needed to approach folks as well. And also use the truth sandwich, which is what's on our right side. The truth sandwich is you start with a fact, you warn about the fact, and then you explain the fallacy, and you end with a fact. It sort of reassures folks and also helps close that causal gap and leaves folks feeling like they understand the issue through and through. I think the next thing we'll talk about is narrative interventions. So this gets a little bit more complicated. As you saw in that video, some of these are building blocks, right? So we have messaging that builds into storytelling, that builds into narrative, that builds into deep narrative, and then we have narrative strategy and cultural strategy. But I think from my perspective, the best places to intervene is in messaging and also in storytelling. That is your point of opportunity because it's still sort of workable, it's still tangible, not something like trying to shift the huge narrative from that starting point, right? Disseminating narrative without considering what stories you're telling or what messaging you're putting out is kind of, it's a Herculean task. But you should remember that you should speak to the pain points in your community with these stories and this messaging that you can produce. The claims and narratives, again, that people cling onto are really they're a reflection of legitimate concerns and legitimate needs that people have. And also remember that, you know, these whatever medium you choose to disseminate this messaging or disseminate your stories, that it has to be accessible to the community that you're trying to reach. Here's some examples of that when it comes to like voting. So on the left, these are some messages that I think we're all pretty familiar with. We hear these all the time, right? And these have to do with social pressure, social proof, defiance, right? Social pressure is people telling us like, go vote, right? Like everyone else is voting, why aren't you voting? Or everyone's gonna know that you're not voting because voting records are public, and you know, so it's like really pressuring folks into engaging in the civic duty. Social proof is like telling folks like, this is what people like you do, right? Like this is you vote, like you're an intellectual or whatever, right? Like this is what we do as a community, and it sort of is it's part of your identity and part of your part of like what makes you belong, right? Defiance is like, you know, telling people that, you know, if you don't vote, like then your voice is not going to be heard, so like don't let others decide for you, right? So those are like some like quick messaging tips that you can really focus on. It's like really focusing and drilling down onto the things that move people to actually vote, that can be quickly translated into phrases, images, you know, things like that, that are quick offhands where people can receive that messaging pretty quickly. The other thing is that, you know, when we talk about what we see during during elections, all that mis and disinformation, those are stories, as I mentioned at the top. That's all it is. These posts that go around that get thousands of shares. These are like, they're just like pretty simple stories, right? The Telemundo poll is the story about how Latinos in the US thought that Trump won that election. Sorry, that I keep calling it an election, won that debate. Or you know, how Democrats are funding extremists, so like they're not to be trusted, right? These are like pretty simple stories that on the other end aren't being, like, they're not being addressed, right? So that's an opportunity for other storytelling, right? Things that share people's positive experiences at the polls. You know, voting being like a really deeply communal thing where people can bump into their neighbors or, you know, other family members at the polls. Also, like, you know, demystifying the process. Like some people are like literally afraid of these like really complex things. But actually like going to a polling center and submitting your vote is not that complicated. And the other thing is also to promote accountability behaviors through stories, right? Making sure that people see examples of folks that, you know, promised to go with other family members and had these like these mechanisms that like made them show up and actually like vote because they promised each other that they would. So I think we do have time for this, if I'm correct. So this is a little scenario simulation thing that we put together. I think, hesitate to call it a simulation, but I think scenario is good, is a good way of posing this for you all. So I want you to think about everything that we just went over from the top to the bottom. And then we're going to take our time machine to August 31st, 2020. And at that moment, you're scrolling online and you spot a number of users trying to combat the use of Pepe the Frog. If you're familiar with that meme, it became like an alt-right meme at the time. That's what it was called. They were trying to combat it with their own use of a mascot in support of the Democratic tickets. And this was that mascot. What you saw is people were using the keywords Biden bear or hashtag bear with Biden. Appeared to coming from a lot of liberal leftist accounts as well. The content was anti-MAGA, anti-alt-right, and some of the tweets were beginning to get hundreds of interactions. So what I'd like for you to do is, in a separate browser, I would recommend going on Twitter and punching in those keywords, bear with Biden, Biden bear, and see what you can bring up. And in the chat, I'd like you to drop some indications that you're using to inform you about what this whole campaign is about, and then whether or not I think you would respond, and if you would, how would you respond to something like this? I think we have like a little bit less than 10 minutes to finish this up. So we'll look at the chat. I think in 5 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, we'll revisit the chat to see folks' responses.
We got some good findings in the chat. I'm elevating Olivia, who says, "Ooh, just found the source of the bear image, pedo bear, a 4chan meme." Good find, Olivia.
Anyone else saying anything interesting? Feel free to just drop it in the chat, just like Olivia did.
Sarah says, one of the account's names is literally memes I found on Telegram, which is tipping me off that this is from a closed network. Good find, Sarah.
I think maybe we could jump ahead now that a couple of folks are already seeing stuff. I think we got a debunk already. We have folks going into other spaces trying to track this stuff down. But yeah, that's exactly correct. This is how I went through the process myself. I chose one of the accounts that seemed to be the originator. And I went to the actual account and I found the use of hashtags to be a little suspect, right? Like they're trying a little too hard. The account was also recently created. If you look, it joined in August of 2020. So that's a good indication that the account might be fake. It also has very low follower counts. The profile picture is suspicious because it's a very close-up picture without a discernible background. Those are usually like AI generated images. If I look closer to it and I found defects, so I was able to confirm that. It's also like what other platforms or websites like this stuff was on. Found it on Facebook, found it on Instagram. And there you can see the hashtag pedo bear. From there, you can sort of search what that is, and you come up with a response that, yeah, this is a mascot that came about from 4chan that was used to sort of warn people that the thread they were on contained child sexual assault material. And that was laundered into the blue guy. And here's the 4chan post where they said, like, hey, Zoomers don't know who pedo bear is, so we can try to make them use it to support Biden, and then we can laugh at them. And if you're worried about that guy who got the tattoo, if you do a reverse image search, you can actually see that he actually did get a tattoo, but it was pedo bear, the real one. And like really tactfully enough, someone copied and pasted like a voter envelope where this person was actually holding a piece of paper. But yeah, I think if anyone else like has other discoveries, please do drop them in the chat. Here I'm linking to DDL's toolkit, where we're sharing some tools with folks that can help you dive into these campaigns a little bit deeper and understand these information ecosystems. And if you're interested in learning more about how you use these tools, you can feel free to go to bit.ly/disinfodefense with the capitals and sign into DDL. And we'll be going through a lot of this during our trainings for the election. But yeah, thank you so much. And I think we can take questions now, correct?
Yeah, thank you all. I'm going to drop the Radcom's Rad session survey in the chat, or Chanel did. Perfect. Thanks, Chanel. And then we can probably start with like one question for folks who are able to stick around.
There's one question from Olivia. Olivia, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself, or I can also paraphrase your question from the Q&A.
Yeah, no worries. I'm happy to talk. Yeah, I popped it in the chat. It's kind of two questions mushed into one. One was just like around pre-bunking and debunking, and just your thoughts on sort of like this fear around just repeating the opposition's messaging in the in the act of trying to pre-bunk and debunk. And I know one of the points was like, don't worry about like the backlash or the backfiring, but I almost feel like it's a little bit different than like people feeling more entrenched in their thoughts, and it's a little bit more of a point around like hearing this, like what's the first, or like if it is like genuinely misinfo and they don't know that this is like are they just like hearing the same thing and like clinging to that because they've heard it in the disinfo before, I guess, sort of like psychologically thinking, speaking. So that's my first question, and if we have time you can look at this one too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that, that can be a concern, and that's like a larger conversation that I think if you have folks that work with you in your comms team or other like associates that you have where you discuss like, has this piece of content or this claim gone past this specific threshold in our community where talking about it won't spread it, right? Is it like is it something that enough people already sort of know about that like you're not being the vector for the spread? And honestly, like I think like I do get sort of nervous about this as well. So I would honestly opt for a strategy like the one that Jigsaw did, where they talk about the tactics that are being used, not necessarily like the actual like sharing the actual misinformation with someone. I think that could be a little bit safer. And that one is more studied and looked at because I mean, like these platforms have so much data on people, like it's crazy that they don't do this all the time. But the fact that they showed that like sharing how these tactics can be used actually even opened people up to more future intervention, I think is pretty beneficial. And I think might get to your second question a little bit where you might need to re-up it, but people will be a little bit more receptive to it if you do talk about the tactics more than I think pre-bunking with the specific content, which I don't think has been looked at that closely yet. Chat, if there are any other questions. The sign up link has been dropped in the chat as well. I think someone had asked about that. I think to answer Jerry's question in the chat, you're not everything is coordinated. Did you forensically trace how Palin and Limbaugh learned of the OG posts? I did not, right? But I mean that was an example of the coordination that we were talking about was at the core, right? The 4chan folks. Usually what happens after that is that once it gets to a certain level, you have influencers like Palin and Limbaugh who just like see stuff on their timelines and then they share it. So I mean, I can't say that like, that we're 100% sure that Palin and Limbaugh sharing it was coordinated or not, but the chances of coordination at that level are pretty low. Like folks in that level, that sort of echelon where they're all influencers and they follow each other, sort of recycle the same content because they just see it on their timelines for the most part. Any other questions? I think we have time for like maybe one more. If not, we can. Yeah, I think we have Nazia, can you talk a little bit more about the role of Meta, et cetera, in helping to spread misinformation by the way they censor some content online? Yeah, so I think it's a pretty broad question. When we think about elections in particular, I think Meta allows politicians to break a lot of its community standards. It gives them a lot of passes specifically because they are politicians. So that was like, I think when you spread about this list called crosscheck. So they have special rules for some people that they're allowed to break and spread mis and disinfo. The other thing is that like these platforms do know what they're doing and they have the ability to, find the misinformation just like we do. We're using pretty low tech ways of doing it because we don't have data access and they do. So, I think generally the policies that they have and just generally aren't as they don't apply in the same way that we think it would because they err a lot more on like freedom of speech, I guess. That not everything that we would consider mis and disinformation would be qualified as a takedown. Also, like, I mean, you know, that's the other question is whether or not taking content down is actually helpful. But I think the platforms as a whole, you know, they have a very loose idea of what information is dangerous and what information is anti-democratic, and the policies that help them make decisions about what is and what isn't anti-democratic speech, and what should or shouldn't be taken down are not public. So we can't really hold them accountable for the decisions they make. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, Jaime. One thing I wanted to say, I did make a mistake, so retraction for my intro. We do not work with platforms. I meant to say platform accountability and some of our partners that we work with. We really pride ourselves on it. Your question about Meta made us think about, you know, how we work independently and just with advocates, researchers, and organizers, et cetera. So just for the recording, but thank you.
Great, and I think this wraps up our presentation. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate the space at Radcoms, and hopefully this was useful, and maybe we'll see you at DDL.